Welcome to the Startup Grind.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our friend, Dan Gordon.
Thanks.
Should I take your jacket?
I'll be okay.
Okay.
Thanks. This is a great crowd. Thanks for bringing them all out.
Yeah.
Thanks to everyone in Startup Grind, too. Like that.
How's it going, Dan?
Not too bad. Not too bad.
Great.
The traffic gods were kind today. It was easy to get in from Tyson's. And
You were listening to Startup Grind podcast, that's why.
maybe
That's
so.
right.
Maybe so.
So we always like to start our fireside chat on a personal note. Let's go way, way, way back. Not too back, because you're a kind of young guy. Let's talk about where you're born, where you're raised, perhaps what your parents did, and talk about your first entrepreneur experience, or since you're a programmer, your first program that you made
Sure.
that you're proud of. So let's start with you.
Well, I was born in San Francisco many years ago, and my family moved to Washington, D.C. when I was 3. My dad was going to do a temporary fellowship here that turned into 50 years sojourn, as happens to many people in Washington. And so I basically grew up here, but somewhere back in my soul, there's a California sun god kind of locked away. It got scope later on when I moved back to Silicon Valley, but that's a different story. In my youth, there were probably 2 things that are not true of most of the people in this audience. The first thing is I came from a pretty well-to-do family. My dad was a doctor, so money was not a motivator in the same way. The founder of Johnson Enterprises, the magazine empire, said that the rich boy doesn't have any incentive. The poor boy doesn't have any opportunity. So in that sense, I had less incentive. But there was another factor of those days, which is that there wasn't any software, or there wasn't any software that mortals could write. There was an ad that was on the radio when I was a kid that said, "How would you like to be a programmer? How would you like to wear a white coat and feel the power of the big machines?" And it's like completely countercultural to what we have today. But that's what it was. It was a priesthood, and you went into the air-conditioned raised floor places, and you put in your punch cards, and ordinary people just didn't write software until Steve came along. So I got into hardware. I loved hacking hardware. I loved building stuff. And most of that stuff in our household was contraband because the stuff I wanted to do with it. So
You were in San Francisco too, so right?
I wanted to get a chemistry set so that I could make things that stunk and blew up. And the only way to get a chemistry set that I could see was on the inside of the comic book. They had a thing, if you sold enough seeds, you could get a chemistry set. You had to sell like 400 packets of seeds or some damn thing. So I went out to do it, and boy, the first day, I got a lot of respect for salespeople. Is there anyone in the audience who does sales? See your hands. Respect. That is one tough job. But I sort of learned that you either sell or you work for someone who sells, and that's how Star was born.
Do you have like a software you built
First software I built was...
you're proud of?
Well, the software I built that I'm proudest of is probably QuickBooks. I was part of the team that did QuickBooks, and it's probably what's going to go on my tombstone. He made billing a snap. What was great about QuickBooks was not the software, although we did a great job with it. What was great about QuickBooks was the conception, that you should actually make bookkeeping simple. Every other person who was in the market at that time wanted to make bookkeeping as complicated as possible because it was a priesthood to be served. And the visionary guy, who's a friend of mine, Ridge Evers, who cooked up QuickBooks, said, it should be easy. That way, all kinds of people who don't do it now will do it. And it was great.
So this is interesting because you had 30 years in the Valley on the technical side.
Yep.
Finally, you went into on the money side with Valhalla Partners. So talk about that. Before he does, remember #StartupGrind at Dan Gordon Tech, right? So tweet out. It's a lot of words of wisdom here.
Right.
So on Valhalla, like, why did you decide to join Valhalla, go on the money side, and sort of not look back on your technical, like, coding,
Well,
I guess?
okay, okay. I wrote software until the late 90s. And in 1998, I sort of was in a startup that didn't start up. It was one of the worst ideas. I had really good luck in startups being employee number 100, employee number 50, employee number 150. I had terrible luck being employee number 1. The couple things I tried like that, I just didn't understand the risks and was completely blindsided by it. So in this case, I was in a startup, and my partner, the business guy, I was the tech guy, he was the business guy. The business guy would go into, like, meet with investors, and he'd say, we'd go in to see investor B, and he'd say, investor A is a jackass. I would sort of walk out of the meeting, and I'd say, Barry, I don't think you should say that. And he'd say, okay, I got it. So we'd go into investor C, and he'd say, Dan told me not to say that investor A is a jackass, but he is, which is the one possibly worst thing he could say. So we got nowhere, and I sort of washed up on the beach there like Tom Hanks in Castaway. And I said, well, what am I going to do next? And I looked around, and I said, there's guys in Moscow, there's people in Moscow who think that a tenth of my salary is good money, and they're writing good software. It's over. I gotta reinvent myself. So I switched over, I pivoted, we would say today. I pivoted over to analyzing technologies and markets for PwC. And what we used to do at PwC was we'd go out and we'd pitch our services to venture capitalists all the time. We'd go in and we'd try to get tech due diligence gigs, which, believe me, is a waste of time. Well, here's the deal. VCs are stingy and entitled, and the deal sizes that we work on are small. So everything's working against you in terms of getting a gig with them. Who wants to spend $5,000 extra getting a tech due diligence report when you know it all already and it's a bigger piece of the check? We had much more luck with private equity firms who are writing much bigger checks and are much more humble about what they know. So if you ever get into that business, go after the private equity, follow the money. Anyhow, so I pitched to the Valhalla guys tech due diligence. And they asked me some tough questions like, what do you think about the security business? And I said what turned out to be an inspired answer. I said, people don't give a damn about security. They give a damn about appearing to be secure. So they'll pay almost anything to seem to be secure, but they won't actually do much to really be secure. They loved that. They thought it was edgy and right on and showed that I wasn't afraid to take stands and blah, blah, blah. And so when they raised their first fund, they said, we have a role on the team for somebody who understands technologies and markets, and I became the director of research. That's how I got into it.
So, I actually was stalking you on your Quora account, and you had answered a couple of questions, and one person said, like, asking you, like, hey, how do I become a VC?
Right.
And your answer was, I don't know if you...
I think the gold standard is